Parents pressured me to marry my high school sweetheart, so I left her at the altar and now they're furious. Hey Reddit, I never thought I'd be here spilling my guts to strangers on the internet, but here we are. Buckle up because this is going to be a long, messy ride through the heart of American family drama. I'm a 25-year-old guy from a small town in the Midwest. You know the type. Everyone knows everyone. High school football is practically a religion, and leaving town is seen as some kind of betrayal. I grew up solidly middle class with parents who worked hard to give me and my younger sister a good life. My high school sweetheart, let's call her Emma, 24, was from the right side of the tracks. Her family owns half the businesses in town, including the car dealership where my dad works as a salesman. We started dating when we were 16, and everyone said we were the perfect couple. The star quarterback and the head cheerleader, it was like something out of a cheesy teen movie. Don't get me wrong, I cared about Emma. She was my first love, my first everything. But as we got older, I started to feel restless. I wanted to see the world, experience new things. Emma was content to stay in our hometown forever, maybe take over her family's business someday. The pressure to settle down started almost as soon as we graduated high school. My parents kept hinting about marriage, kids, buying a house in the neighborhood. Emma's parents were even worse, always talking about how we were meant to be, and how Emma's mom had married her high school sweetheart too. I tried to put it off by going to college, but even that was a compromise. I wanted to go to a big state school, maybe even out of state, but ended up at the local community college so I could be close to Emma. She didn't even bother with college, starting work at her family's business right after high school. Things came to a head last year. We'd been together for 8 years at that point, and the pressure was becoming unbearable. My mom started leaving bridal magazines around the house. Emma's dad offered me a job at the dealership, with strong hints that I could take over someday if I played my cards right, i.e., put a ring on Emma's finger. I felt like I was suffocating. Every time I tried to talk to Emma about my doubts, she'd tear up and ask if I didn't love her anymore. My parents would lecture me about responsibility and growing up. Emma's parents would remind me how lucky I was to be part of the family. In a moment of weakness, or maybe temporary insanity, I proposed. The ring was picked out by our mothers, the proposal planned by our fathers. I felt like a puppet going through the motions, but the look of joy on Emma's face when I got down on one knee made me think maybe I was just having cold feet. This was what I was supposed to want, right? The next 6 months were a whirlwind of wedding planning. Our mothers took over completely, turning it into the event of the season. 500 guests, a designer dress for Emma, the works. I felt like I was watching it all happen from outside my body. 2 weeks before the wedding, I had a complete breakdown. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The thought of walking down that aisle made me physically ill. I tried to talk to my best friend, Jake, 26, about it, but he just clapped me on the back and said every guy gets nervous before the big day. The night before the wedding, I was a mess. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I went through with this, I'd be giving up on all my dreams. I'd never leave this town, never see the world, never figure out who I really was outside of being Emma's boyfriend. I'd like to say I handled it maturely, that I sat down with Emma and our families and explained my feelings calmly. But that's not what happened. Instead, I packed a bag in the middle of the night, left a note for my parents, and drove off in my beat-up old truck. I ended up at a motel 3 towns over, shaking and crying and wondering if I just made the biggest mistake of my life. The next morning, my phone exploded. Calls and texts from my parents, Emma, her parents, our friends. I couldn't bear to answer any of them. I sent one text to my sister, Sarah, 22, letting her know I was safe but needed some time. I spent the next week in a daze, driving aimlessly from town to town. I kept expecting to feel relieved, but mostly I just felt guilty and scared. What had I done? How could I face everyone after this? Eventually, I ran out of money and had to go home. I pulled into our driveway at 2 a.m., hoping to sneak in and deal with everything in the morning. No such luck. My parents were waiting up and all hell broke loose. My mom was crying, asking where she'd gone wrong. My dad was furious, saying I'd embarrassed the whole family and probably cost him his job. They demanded explanations, apologies, anything to make sense of what I'd done. I tried to explain how trapped I'd felt, how I wasn't ready for marriage and wasn't sure I ever would be. They weren't having it. My dad called me a coward, said real men don't run away from their responsibilities. My mom just kept sobbing about how she'd have to face everyone at church on Sunday. The next few days were a nightmare. Word spread fast in our small town, and suddenly I was the local pariah. People I'd known my whole life were giving me dirty looks at the grocery store. I got fired from my part-time job at the hardware store. The owner said he couldn't have someone unreliable working for him. Emma's family was understandably out for blood. Her dad came by the house, threatening to sue us for the cost of the wedding. He made good on his threat to fire my dad, leaving my family in a precarious financial situation. The worst part was seeing Emma. I ran into her at the gas station, and the look of hurt and betrayal in her eyes nearly broke me. She didn't yell or cry, just looked at me like I was a stranger before walking away. Somehow, that was worse than if she'd screamed at me. My sister, Sarah, was the only one who seemed to understand. She'd come home from college for the wedding and decided to stay an extra week to help deal with the fallout. Late one night, she confessed that she'd always thought Emma and I were wrong for each other, but hadn't known how to say it. As the weeks passed, the initial shock wore off, but the tension remained. My parents barely spoke to me, treating me like a disappointing house guest rather than their son. I overheard them arguing late at night. My mom blaming my dad for not raising me right, my dad accusing my mom of babying me. I started looking for jobs out of town, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere. But it turns out, when your only work experience is a part-time hardware store gig and your references all hate you, job hunting isn't easy. Emma's family made good on their threats and sued us for the wedding costs. My parents had to remortgage the house to settle, driving an even bigger wedge between us. Every time I tried to apologize or make amends, they'd shut me down. My dad would mutter about how apologies don't pay the bills, while my mom would just sigh dramatically and change the subject. Things came to a head about a month after I returned. I came home one day to find my parents and Emma's parents in our living room, along with Emma herself. They'd staged an intervention of sorts, trying to convince me to make things right by going through with the wedding. Emma's mom went on and on about how couples go through rough patches, how with some counseling we could work things out. My mom chimed in about how marriage takes work and commitment. Emma just sat there silently, staring at her hands. I lost it. I told them all that I was an adult, capable of making my own decisions. That I was sorry for hurting everyone, but I couldn't live my life to make other people happy. I said some things I'm not proud of, accusing our parents of living vicariously through us, of being stuck in the past. Emma finally spoke up, saying quietly that she deserved someone who wanted to be with her, not someone who had to be forced into it. It was the first sensible thing anyone had said all day, and I felt a rush of guilt for not having the courage to say it myself months ago. The intervention ended with a lot of shouting and slammed doors. Emma left in tears, her parents threatening more legal action. My parents looked at me like I was a stranger. I packed a bag and went to stay with Jake, unable to bear the tension at home any longer. Jake, bless him, let me crash on his couch even though I could tell he didn't fully understand or approve of what I'd done. His wife, Megan, 25, was less forgiving. She'd been one of Emma's bridesmaids and made it clear she thought I was the scum of the earth. The atmosphere in their tiny apartment was almost as tense as at my parents' house. I spent the next few weeks bouncing between friends' couches, each stay getting progressively shorter as people's sympathy wore thin. I was running out of options and money fast. In desperation, I reached out to my uncle Steve, 53, my mom's brother who'd moved to California years ago. He'd always been the black sheep of the family, leaving our small town to chase his dreams in Hollywood. He never quite made it big, but he seemed happy with his life as a moderately successful character actor. To my surprise, Uncle Steve not only answered my call but offered me a place to stay. He said he'd been through something similar in his youth and understood the need to break free. Within a week, I was on a bus to Los Angeles, equal parts terrified and excited. Arriving in LA was like landing on another planet. Uncle Steve's apartment was tiny compared to my parents' house, but it felt like paradise to me. For the first time in months, I could breathe. Uncle Steve was great, giving me space to decompress while also encouraging me to start building a life for myself. He helped me find a job waiting tables at a diner near his place. Nothing glamorous, but it was a start. Just as I was starting to feel like I might be okay, reality came crashing back in. My sister called, in tears, saying that our mom had some kind of breakdown. Apparently, she'd been putting on a brave face in public, but at home she'd stopped eating, barely got out of bed, and cried constantly. The guilt hit me like a truck. I'd been so focused on escaping, on finally living my own life, that I hadn't fully considered the impact on my family. Sarah begged me to come home just for a visit to try and make things right. I was torn. Part of me wanted to run back home and fix everything. But a louder part reminded me that going back now would undo all the progress I'd made. Uncle Steve, overhearing my side of the conversation, sat me down for a hard talk. He told me about how he'd gone through something similar when he left town. How our grandparents had guilt-tripped him, how my mom, his sister, had accused him of abandoning the family. How it had taken years, but eventually they'd come to accept his choices. You can't set yourself on fire to keep others warm, he said. It was cliché, but it resonated with me. In the end, I decided not to go home. Instead, I wrote a long email to my family, explaining my feelings and apologizing for the hurt I'd caused, but also standing firm in my decision to live my own life. I sent similar emails to Emma and her family. The responses were mixed. Sarah wrote back almost immediately, saying she understood and supported me, even if she didn't agree with how I'd handled things. My dad sent a terse reply saying he'd think about what I'd written. Emma's parents threatened more legal action. Emma herself sent a short message saying she was trying to move on and wished me well. My mom didn't respond at all. Life in LA wasn't easy, but it was mine. I worked long hours at the diner, took some classes at a community college, made new friends who didn't know or care about my past. Slowly, I started to figure out who I was outside of the roles I'd been pushed into back home. It's been a year since I left Emma at the altar. Things aren't perfect, but they're better. I'm still working at the diner, but I've been promoted to shift manager. I'm dating casually, nothing serious, just enjoying the freedom to figure out what I really want in a partner. My relationship with my family is still strained, but improving bit by bit. Sarah visits when she can and we've grown closer than ever. My dad and I exchange awkward but civil emails every few weeks. My mom finally started responding to my messages, though they're stilted and formal. Emma, last I heard, is dating someone new. I hope she's happy. I know what I did was cruel and I'll always regret hurting her. But I also know that going through with the wedding would have been even crueler in the long run. I still don't know what the future holds. Maybe I'll stay in LA. Maybe I'll move somewhere else entirely. Maybe I'll even go back home someday when the wounds have healed. But for now, I'm just focused on living my life one day at a time, making my own choices and dealing with the consequences. To anyone out there feeling trapped by other people's expectations, it's okay to choose yourself. It won't be easy and people will probably get hurt. But living a lie hurts more in the long run. Edit: Wow, I didn't expect this post to blow up like it has. Thank you all for your support and for sharing your own stories. I'm trying to respond to comments, but there are a lot, so please be patient. To address some common questions/comments. 1. Yes, I know leaving someone at the altar is a terrible thing to do. I'm not proud of how I handled it, and if I could go back, I'd have ended things much earlier and more maturely. I was young, scared, and felt cornered. It doesn't excuse my actions, but it explains them. 2. No, Emma and I haven't gotten back together and we're not going to. That ship has sailed. Last I heard, she's happy with her new boyfriend, and I'm genuinely glad for her. 3. To those saying I should have just manned up and gone through with the wedding, would it really have been better to marry someone I wasn't sure about, potentially trapping us both in an unhappy marriage? I don't think so. 4. My parents and I are still working on our relationship. It's a slow process, but we're making progress. They've started to understand that my leaving wasn't about rejecting them, but about finding myself. 5. For those asking about Uncle Steve, he's doing great. Having me around seems to have reignited his passion for acting, and he's been going on more auditions lately. He's become like a second father to me. 6. To the people telling me to unalive myself, I get that you're angry on Emma's behalf, but that's not cool. I'm not going to do that, and I hope you'll reconsider telling anyone to do that, no matter what they've done. 7. Yes, I've thought about writing a book or screenplay about this experience. No, I'm not going to. It feels wrong to profit from a situation that caused so much pain to others. 8. To those of you in similar situations feeling pressured into life choices you're not sure about, please learn from my mistakes. Have those difficult conversations early. Be honest with yourself and others about what you want. It's better to deal with short-term discomfort than long-term misery. Update 6 months later. Hey Reddit. A lot has happened since my last post, and I thought I'd give you all an update. First, the big news: I'm moving back home. Not permanently and not to my parents' house, but to a city about an hour from my hometown. I got a job offer as an assistant manager at a new restaurant opening there. It's a big step up from my diner job, and I'm excited about the opportunity. The decision to move back to the area wasn't easy. I've loved my time in LA, and part of me wanted to stay. But I realized that running away from my problems wasn't the answer. I need to face my past if I ever want to truly move forward. I've talked it over with my family and things are cautiously optimistic. My dad seems genuinely happy that I'll be closer. He even offered to help me move, which is huge coming from him. My mom is more reserved, but she's trying. She asked about my apartment hunt and even suggested a few areas to look. Sarah is over the moon about me coming back. She's been my biggest supporter through all of this, and I'm looking forward to being able to see her more often. She's finishing up her master's degree at the state university, so we'll only be about 30 minutes apart. Uncle Steve was surprisingly supportive of my decision to move. He told me he was proud of me for facing my past head-on instead of running from it like he did. We've made plans for him to visit once I'm settled, and I'm already looking forward to showing him around my new city. Now for the elephant in the room, Emma. I reached out to let her know I was moving back to the area, mostly as a courtesy so she wouldn't be blindsided if we ran into each other. Her response was polite but distant. She's still with her new boyfriend and they recently got engaged. I'm happy for her, truly. She deserves someone who's all in, and I'm glad she's found that. The town gossip mill is already churning, of course. My sister says people are speculating about whether Emma and I will get back together, not happening, or if I'm moving back to make amends, also not happening, at least not in the way they probably mean. I'm trying not to let it bother me. People will talk no matter what I do. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous about being back in the area. There's still a lot of hurt feelings and unresolved issues. But I also feel like this is a necessary step in my journey. I can't keep running from my past forever. My new apartment is small but nice in a part of the city that's up and coming. It's mostly young professionals and college students, which feels like a good fit. I'm looking forward to making a fresh start while still being close enough to work on my family relationships. The new job is challenging but exciting. It's a farm-to-table concept restaurant, which is pretty cutting edge for the area. My time in LA exposed me to a lot of food trends, so I feel like I have something unique to bring to the table, pun intended. My boss seems to value my outside perspective, which is a refreshing change from the "that's not how we do things here" attitude I grew up with. I've been in my new place for about a month now and things are complicated. I've seen my parents a few times. The first visit was awkward as hell. My mom kept fussing over me like I was still 16, asking if I was eating enough and if I needed her to do my laundry. My dad mostly sat in silence, occasionally grunting in response to my attempts at conversation. The second visit was a little better. We managed to have a real conversation about my job and my apartment. My mom even asked to see pictures of my place in LA, which felt like a big step. She got a little teary-eyed looking at them, murmuring something about her baby living so far away. It made me realize that as much as I felt trapped before, my leaving must have been really hard on them too. I ran into Emma at the grocery store last week. It was as awkward as you'd expect, but also okay. We made small talk about the weather and my new job. She introduced me to her fiancé, a nice-looking guy named Chris who seemed a bit wary of me. Can't blame him. The encounter was mercifully short, but it left me feeling weirdly relieved. Like maybe we could coexist in the same general area without it being a whole thing. Not everything has been smooth sailing though. Emma's parents still hate my guts, which became very clear when I ran into her dad at the hardware store. He made a big show of turning his back on me and loudly telling the cashier about how you can't trust young people these days. It stung, but I can't really fault him for being angry. Some of my old friends have reached out since I moved back. Jake and I got together for a beer, which was nice but a little strained. He admitted that he'd been angry with me for a long time, both for hurting Emma and for abandoning him. We're working on rebuilding our friendship, but it's slow going. Megan, Jake's wife, is still frosty towards me. She and Emma are still close friends, and I think she sees my return as some kind of threat. I've tried to reassure her that I'm not here to stir up trouble, but I'm not sure she believes me. My sister has been my rock through all of this. She comes over at least once a week, usually with takeout and a sympathetic ear. She's been filling me in on all the family drama I've missed and helping me navigate the choppy waters of being back. One surprise has been my cousin Becky, 31. We were never particularly close growing up. She's a few years older and always seemed to have it all together. She reached out after hearing I was back in town and invited me for coffee. Turns out, she went through something similar a few years back, breaking off an engagement 6 months before the wedding. We've bonded over our shared experiences of bucking family expectations. Work has been a welcome distraction from all the personal drama. I'm throwing myself into getting the restaurant ready for our grand opening next month. My boss has been great, giving me more responsibility as I prove myself. There's talk of me potentially becoming the general manager if things go well, which is both exciting and terrifying. I've started seeing a therapist, Dr. Rodriguez, 58. It wasn't my idea initially. Sarah gently suggested it might help me process everything. I was resistant at first, but I have to admit it's been helpful. Dr. Rodriguez has been helping me work through my guilt over how I handled things with Emma, my complicated feelings about my parents, and my fears about moving forward. One of the hardest things has been dealing with the sense of déjà vu. Sometimes, when I'm driving down familiar streets or bumping into people I've known my whole life, I get this overwhelming feeling of being right back where I started. Like the past year and a half in LA was just a dream. Dr. Rodriguez is helping me work through these feelings, reminding me that I'm not the same person I was when I left. I've had a few dates since moving back, nothing serious. It's weird dating in a smaller city where everyone seems to know everyone else's business. I went out with a nice girl named Allison, 27, a couple times, but things fizzled out when she found out about my history with Emma. She said she wasn't comfortable being the other woman, even though Emma and I have been over for a long time. It was frustrating, but I get it. Small town memories are long. My parents and I are slowly rebuilding our relationship. We've started having Sunday dinners together, just the four of us. It's still tense sometimes and there are topics we carefully avoid, but it's progress. Last week, my dad actually asked me about my job, showing genuine interest in what I do. It was a small thing, but it meant a lot. Mom is still struggling, I can tell. She alternates between treating me like the prodigal son returned and acting like she's walking on eggshells around me. I overheard her on the phone with one of her friends, defending my decision to move back but also apologizing for my past actions, as if they reflected badly on her. It's clear she's still processing everything too. I've been thinking a lot about forgiveness lately. Forgiving myself for the hurt I caused, forgiving my parents for the pressure they put on me, forgiving the town for its judgment. It's a work in progress, but I'm trying. There are still bad days. Days when I question my decision to move back, when the weight of everyone's expectations and disappointments feels crushing. But there are good days too. Days when I feel like I'm exactly where I need to be, working towards something meaningful. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe I'll stay here, build a life in this new city that's close to but not quite my hometown. Maybe I'll move away again someday. But for now, I'm taking it one day at a time, trying to balance making amends with staying true to myself. To anyone out there facing similar struggles with family expectations and small-town pressures, it's okay to choose your own path. It's okay to make mistakes. And it's okay to come back and face those mistakes. Growth isn't linear, and sometimes you have to revisit your past to move forward. Edit 2. Thanks again for all the support and advice. You guys have been amazing through this whole journey. A few updates on things people have asked about. 1. The restaurant's grand opening was last week, and it was a huge success. We were completely booked and the reviews have been great. My boss was thrilled and hinted at that promotion again. Fingers crossed. 2. Emma's wedding is coming up next month. No, I'm not invited, obviously, and no, I don't want to be. I'm genuinely happy for her and Chris. Sarah's been keeping me updated so I know which places to avoid that weekend to minimize any awkward run-ins. 3. My parents came to the restaurant for dinner last night. It was nice. Dad actually complimented my work, which felt huge. Mom got a little teary-eyed and said she was proud of me. We're not fully healed, but we're getting there. 4. Uncle Steve is coming to visit next week. I'm excited to show him around and introduce him to my coworkers. He's been my biggest cheerleader through all of this and I want him to see how well I'm doing. 5. To the person who asked if I regret my decision to leave Emma at the altar. Yes and no. I regret the way I handled it and the pain I caused, but I don't regret the decision itself. We weren't right for each other and going through with the wedding would have been a mistake. 6. I'm still single and that's okay. I'm focusing on my job, my family relationships, and myself right now. When the right person comes along, I'll be in a much better place to start a healthy relationship. 7. For those asking about Jake and Megan, things are slowly improving. Jake and I play basketball together sometimes, almost like old times. Megan is still cautious around me, but she's thawing a bit. Baby steps. Thanks again for being part of this journey with me. Your support and perspectives have been invaluable. Here's to continuing to grow and learn no matter where life takes us.